Now, the proposal to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution and establish a voice to Parliament to advise on First Nations issues has been comprehensively rejected by the Australian public. The majority of voters in every state and territory, except the ACT, have rejected the proposal.
Political reporter Chantal Al-Khoury joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Good morning to you, Chantal. Now, we heard from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, overnight, as well as Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney. They both gave very emotional speeches. The government has obviously campaigned very hard for this right up until polling day. How did they both respond?
Good morning. Well, it was definitely a really sombre mood from the government and many Yes campaigners around the country yesterday. They were obviously very hopeful until the very end that Australians would vote yes to this referendum. And of course, speaking after the result, we heard from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who says he accepts the decision of the Australian people. He said that he recognised that this campaign had been a heavy weight for many to carry and that the outcome will be hard to bear, particularly for many of those who've been campaigning and had a lifetime of advocacy around this topic. He also pointed to a lack of bipartisan support. We obviously know that the coalition has strongly opposed this, and he's long said that had they had that support, they might have had a better outcome, and also blamed misinformation around the referendum. He said that while he knew it wasn't going to be easy, that it was the right decision, but it's also not the end of the road. He says there are obviously many questions about what comes next and what this means for reconciliation and government efforts around that area. He says that they need to seek a new way forward and that the government intends to do what they can to close the gap and advance reconciliation. Here's what he had to say.
I will always be ambitious for our country, ambitious for us to be the very best version of ourselves. I will always be optimistic for what we can achieve together. This moment of disagreement does not define us, and it will not divide us. We are not yes voters or no voters. We are all Australians. And it is as Australians, together, that we must take our country beyond this debate.
We also heard from Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney. As you said, both gave very emotional speeches. She did say that it was a day for sadness, but assured that this is not the end for reconciliation as well. Here's what she had to say.
To all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, I want to say this. I know the last few months have been tough. But be proud of who you are. Be proud of your identity. Be proud of the 65,000 years of history and culture that you are part of and your rightful place in this country. We will carry on and we will move forward and we will thrive.
Linda Burney there, obviously very emotional, as you said, Chantal. Followed previously, there was the Prime Minister as well. They were both key drivers for the Yes campaign. But what other reaction has there been?
Well, some Indigenous leaders have begun what they've called a week of silence to grieve the outcome of the referendum. They've issued a statement last night saying the referendum was a chance for non-Indigenous Australians to show grace and gratitude, and now is not the time to dissect the reasons for this tragic outcome, but instead time to mourn and consider the consequences of this result. On the other side of this referendum debate, we know that the opposition has been actively campaigning against this proposal. We heard from opposition leader Peter Dutton yesterday, who claimed this result was good for the country and continued to call it a divisive proposal. Here's some of what he had to say.
And while yes and no voters may hold differences of opinion, these opinions of difference do not diminish our love for our country or our regard for each other. This is the referendum that Australia did not need to have. The proposal and the process should have been designed to unite Australians, not to divide us.
We've also heard from many senior figures in the Yes campaign who've given a scathing criticism of the No campaign. One of the leading Yes campaigners, Thomas Mayo, said the country has seen a disgusting No campaign and said history will reflect poorly on Peter Dutton and many who oppose this.
Chantel Al-Khoury, many thanks for that analysis.
Well, for more analysis now on last night's vote, we are joined in the studio now by the ABC's referendum correspondent, Dan Borscher. Dan, good morning.
Good morning.
You've been travelling around the country, you've been speaking with Indigenous leaders, people who have spent great portions of their lives campaigning just to have yesterday's vote. How are you feeling this morning after that? I mean, you can sort of see the emotion on the Prime Minister's face and Linda Burney's face there.
Well, I guess as I woke up this morning, my phone was flooded with text messages from people that I've spoken with right across this year, and there's a whole range of emotions that they've been conveying to me, though some are absolutely devastated that this has happened and are worried about what it says about our nation. Those who weren't supporting it say this is the right move, although some, I must note, are also worried about what next and what this says about our country. And I guess for me, I'm quite reflective about what is the story that we will tell ourselves as a nation as a result of this referendum? Because as we've heard this morning, it was an incredibly overwhelming result. Every state voting no, the national population voting no as well. The only jurisdiction was the ACT saying yes. So there is going to be a lot of consideration about why was that? Was it simply about the model, the structure? Was it the misinformation, the disinformation, the campaign from no that was ruthless in its simplicity? Or was it all the other actors that were involved? Because there's also been another component to this, and that is the pain that's been caused to so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Up until just a couple of days ago, I had people calling me and saying that they wanted to be out of the debate because they felt like their right to exist was actually what was being discussed here. And I found that really, really confronting, and I suspect most people will.
Dan, we know that there is a week of mourning for reflection for many First Nations Australians. What will be involved in that week, and then what are the next steps after that to heal, to stitch the nation back together?
Yeah, well, I suspect that will be a complete media blackout, is what I've been told, that there have been very senior Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders who have been pulling out of media appearances this morning because they don't want to be involved or engaged in those conversations. I think there will be a lot of soul-searching and consideration on an individual base of what this means, but also on a broader national base of, as I mentioned, what is the story that this tells us. There is a huge responsibility here on the politicians from all stripes who stood up last night. Of course, this will land at the government. They are in power. They are the ones that chose to go to this referendum. So what sort of mechanism and model do they want? That'll be key. However, the opposition campaigned very strongly on calls for another referendum, on recognition, on local and regional structures of a voice that would be in legislation rather than enshrined in the Constitution. So does that mean we can expect a private members bill and campaigning to begin on that? And when it comes to that question of how do we start to heal, I think humility is going to be really key to this. And I think that the way that politicians handle themselves is going to be key, and everyone is going to be watching. We have such a heightened sense of what people are saying and how they are saying it right now. And I suspect that most politicians would be aware of that. And as we head back into a week of parliamentary sittings from tomorrow, all eyes are going to be on them and the tone that they choose to take.
I'm curious to get your view on what you think this might say, because there's been a lot of focus on the campaigns, how well they did, disinformation, things like that. But this margin is pretty big, 61%, I think, nearly, of Australia voted no. Does that tell us something more about what exists in our society, do you think, more so than maybe the debate we've had?
Does it tell us about racism? Yeah, I think it does. I think that is part of the story here. I don't think it's the whole story, and I think it was Nikki Sava some months ago that said, not everyone that votes no is a racist, but bet your bottom dollar that everyone that is a racist is going to be voting no. The vitriol that I have seen has been completely shocking this year. There have been things that I've seen said to others that has chilled me to the core. There have been things that have been said about myself that have been utterly dehumanising. And that has been seen, I think, by those that are saying it as the normal course of how we have a national debate. That is clearly not the case, and I'm disappointed that we didn't see more people calling that out from the campaigns, particularly the No campaign. I think there were many opportunities where it was put to them, this person said this, at a conference, the CPAC conference, for example. And I think that there were so many times there that needed to be really challenged by that No campaign, and it wasn't. And I think I think there will be a lot of consideration about what that means and why. And I think this comes back to this fundamental question of truth-telling. There was a survey that came out earlier in the year that indicated most Australians don't know an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. And I think that would extend to not having a deep understanding of our shared collective history. I mean, that was one of the things that I found most powerful this year, is the resilience. As I was travelling around, sitting with elders, I've told the story before about Auntie Faye Clayton-Mosley, who was a member of the Stolen Generation. Her and I stood outside of the Cootamundra Girls' Home and tears welled in her eyes as she told me about when she was taken, that no one said they loved her. And they said that she was taken and her family didn't love her. She wasn't told she was loved for all the time that she was there. When she got out of there as a young woman, she spoke to her mum and said, "Why didn't you love me?" And she said, "Of course I did. I never stopped loving you. I wasn't allowed to see you." That's the impact of the policies, the laws that have been put in place, that were put in place. And those impacts resonate as strongly now. She's become a very famous artist as a way of dealing and navigating that. That story is not well known. Her story is not well known. We need to understand our history. And when she was telling me that, it wasn't to say this is someone's fault. This is about apportioning blame. This is about someone taking responsibility. She was saying that because she wanted to share that from a place of generosity and to share her resilience. I think there's something pretty powerful in that.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us this morning, particularly after a very late night.
Thank you.
But, we appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.